The damning Inspector General's report on FBI FISA abuse is out. Quote, FBI leadership supported relying on Christopher Steele's reporting to seek a FISA order targeting Carter Page after being advised of and giving consideration to concerns expressed by a department attorney that Christopher Steele may have been hired by someone associated with a rival candidate or campaign, unquote. These actions have now placed our country in a dangerous position, including the impeachment of a president with the fake dossier as its foundational information. And if they can do it to a president, what can they do to us? Stick with us. This is the Rob Maness Show. My fellow Americans, the FBI apparently made a lot of errors that put our country into a more than 3-year effort to wrongfully investigate and remove a duly elected president and deprive several of his associates of their civil liberties. However, in spite of all that, the IG report states, quote, although we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence of intentional misconduct on the part of the case agents who assisted National Security Division's Office of Intelligence in preparing the applications or the agents and supervisors who performed the Woods procedures, unquote. But don't be fooled. The next few words and 99% of this 400 plus page report are damning and state, quote, we also did not receive satisfactory explanations for the errors or missing information, unquote. Even though the FBI acknowledged the Crossfire Hurricane investigation would receive intense scrutiny because it was an investigation into a presidential campaign of the opposing party, the IG's report comes to a startling conclusion about the FISA warrant application on Carter Page, saying that, quote, we found that members of the Crossfire Hurricane team failed to meet the basic obligation to ensure that the Carter Page FISA applications were scrupulously accurate. We identified significant inaccuracies and omissions in each of the 4 applications, 7 in the first FISA application and a total of 17 by the final renewal application, unquote. The report's conclusions go on to tell a sordid story of a collection of such seriously egregious acts by the FBI as a whole that I am left gravely concerned about our country. The Inspector General agrees, stating, quote, we are deeply concerned that so many basic and fundamental errors were made by 3 separate, hand-picked investigative teams on one of the most sensitive FBI investigations. After the matter had been briefed to the highest levels within the FBI, even though the information sought through use of FISA authority related so closely to an ongoing presidential campaign, and even those involved with the investigation knew that their actions were likely to be subjected to close scrutiny. We believe this circumstance reflects a failure, not just by those who prepared the FISA applications, but also by the managers and supervisors in the Crossfire Hurricane chain of command, including FBI senior officials who were briefed as the investigation progressed, unquote. We should all be concerned and work every day to force necessary changes in our government. Now is the time. More than any other in our history, these failures in the FBI are only the tip of the iceberg. The media cabal that supported the Steele dossier story over and over, the government employees who obviously have shown political bias, the political appointees in the intelligence community who used the Steele dossier, even including it in the intelligence community assessment briefed to President Obama concerning Russia's interference in the 2016 elections, and now one political party using the information as its backdrop to attempt to impeach the president. My friends, we are in very dangerous times, and we need to stay focused on this reality, that only in our country can a people stand up to the most powerful government in the world to change it. But if we don't do it now, this great experiment called the United States of America will be lost. Former New York police officer, host of Newsmax TV's America Talks Live, and my friend John Cardillo joins us for analysis of the IG report and his thoughts on where the next steps may lead. John Cardillo, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, my friend.
Great to see you. It's been way too long, Colonel.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on to talk about this DOJ IG report on FISA abuse. A lot of acronyms there. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That's what FISA means. That's what people need to know. And the word abuse is not an acronym. But before I ask you what your overall thoughts on the report were, I was impressed that U.S. Attorney John Durham, who's got the criminal investigation leg of this investigation, put a statement out, and so did AG Barr, just within minutes of the report dropping yesterday. And I'd like to just highlight a couple things in their statements. One from Durham: based on the evidence collected to date and while our investigation is ongoing, last month we advised the IG that we do not agree with some of the report's conclusions as to predication and the FBI case opening. And the AG was even tougher. The Inspector General's report now makes clear that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions that, in my view, were insufficiently taken to justify the steps that it took. It's also clear that from its inception, the evidence produced by the investigation was consistently exculpatory. This IG report reflects a clear abuse of the FISA process. Now, I want to get your opinion on the report overall first, but the report does say they did not find any documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias existed, and that the predicate for the Crossfire Hurricane counterintelligence investigation was acceptable under department policy as it stood then. What do you think about that? And then the two statements from Barr and Durham.
All right, so let's go in reverse, right? Let's look at something very important you just read, and it's a nuance where Attorney General Barr said, well, Attorney General Barr was very clear when he said exculpatory evidence, right? Meaning evidence that would exonerate Donald Trump, members of the Trump campaign at the time, 2016. At that point, the investigation should have been halted. They should have gone in and sat down with Loretta Lynch, who I think was one of the most corrupt attorney generals in the history of the United States, attorneys general in the history of the United States. She was doing the bidding of the Obama administration. But if everything was on the up and up, you would have gone in, sat with the AG and said, hey, Mr. Attorney General, we've got exculpatory evidence here. We've got to shut this down until we can do a more thorough review. Excuse me, or if we have independent corroborating evidence beyond the exculpatory that says we need to continue on. That's Barr's statement. We had Durham's statement that he disagrees. So let me tell you what I'm encouraged by, Rob. Something else you just read. Horowitz never said bad things didn't happen or crimes didn't happen. He said what you just read. He never received or obtained testimonial or documentary evidence that it happened. But remember, Horowitz's scope is very limited. He can only speak to current employees of the Department of Justice or any sub-agency, DEA, FBI, any agency that falls under DOJ. He couldn't speak to Andy McCabe. He couldn't speak to Lisa Page. He couldn't speak to James Comey. They no longer work there. Durham can. The other thing that Horowitz doesn't have is criminal subpoena power, and there's reason for that. That's a way to keep the IG in check so he doesn't butt heads with the Attorney General by being able to criminally subpoena the AG or his staff, right? So He didn't find it. He didn't find it. But Durham may very well have that testimonial, that documentary evidence, which I suspect he does, or both Barr and Durham wouldn't have put themselves out there like they did.
Yeah, I agree, John. One of the questions that popped out at me, and I've read the report, is this one, and I wanted to get your take on it, especially based on your Department of Justice and law enforcement experience. What can or should the FISA court itself, the judges that really were duped 4 times, really, what can or should they do?
And I think the bigger question is, what should Chief Justice John Roberts do? Because ultimately he oversees the FISA court. And I think this needs to go to the Supreme Court. But those judges, what John Roberts should do is issue a statement, an edict, saying that if you don't come, in light of this, if any FBI agent, any federal agent, any federal prosecutor, that they come in pairs, the prosecutor and the agent go together and they make these applications and these affirmations. If you come before this court with anything that doesn't meet the highest ethical and evidentiary bar, we're going to go back to DOJ and recommend your prosecution. You know, Rob, this is about the most sacrosanct warrant I can think of, a warrant to secretly spy on American citizens, a warrant that allows you to subvert the Fourth Amendment, to circumvent it. The bar has to be the highest imaginable bar, and that's what the judges should be doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, this FISA warrant is the most intrusive method of investigation in a counterintelligence investigation. But one of the most effective means is confidential human sources and undercover employees, which is talked about at length in the report. One of the interesting comments in the news media to try to mitigate this report coming out was that there were no spying on the Trump campaign. Well, I just read several, like dozen pages about CHSs and UCEs. That's a undercover employee of the FBI or the government that were used in Crossfire Hurricane. So I think that's an issue that probably people are scratching their heads going, what the heck does that mean? Because it's obvious that they use these folks, and even had one in the campaign itself as an operative, as a consultant, I'm assuming, that they didn't know about till afterwards. Or so the IG report says. What are your thoughts on that? Are they just splitting hairs in the language of the report?
I think we know who these people are, right? It's Stephen Halper, it's Mifsud, and it's all these various and sundry players who just miraculously, for no reason whatsoever, chose to go reach out to George Papadopoulos and General Flynn and Roger Stone and all these other people. So they absolutely used operatives and confidential sources, but it sure smells to me like entrapment. I know I've had George Papadopoulos on the show. I know him. I've spoken to him on air. I've spoken to him privately, and he's okay with me mentioning something. And he thought it was very peculiar that they wanted to pay him $10,000 in cash. He thought that was very peculiar that they wanted to pay him in cash. Who does that? You wire transfer somebody money. You give them a check if you want them to be a consultant for you on a business deal overseas. And so I think the FBI used these sources. I think they played very fast and loose with them. And I think they're splitting hairs. Look, I think Horowitz is an ethical guy, Rob, but I think he's also an institutional guy. He wanted to preserve the institution, and so he knows that one day his tenure is going to be done at DOJ, and he's going to have to go to a white shoe law firm and make a couple of $1 million a year, and he can't alienate everybody, so he split the baby here. All right, there's a lot of wrongdoing inside the FBI, but I'm going to stop short of criminal referrals because, hey, Durham's the criminal investigator. He's got that power. Let him deal with it.
Okay, so speaking of human sources and human beings being involved in spying on the Trump campaign, these guys in Crossfire Hurricane even sent a supervisory agent in, John, to give an intel briefing to the president-elect so they could spy on people in the room that were part of the that were subjects in the investigation. What is that if it's not spying?
Listen, I think that they did more than that. I think that was absolutely spying, Rob. Come on, you're a colonel in the United States military. You flew one of our most secretive airborne platforms, a nuclear-capable bomber. You know how these things work. Plus, they do that. They bring somebody in to the White House at that level. But remember what they did to General Flynn. General Flynn never knew he was in an interview with the FBI. General Flynn thought he was talking to two FBI agents way down the national security chain of command while he was the national security advisor to the President of the United States. Thought he was talking to two subordinates. He was never told this was actually an interrogation looking at him in a criminal capacity. What went on here should send a chill down the spine of every American. It was so dirty and it was so corrupt in how they did this, sending spies in the White House. Rod Rosenstein saying he would have won a wire because nobody checked him. I just hope that John Durham is doing what we started this out by saying we think he's doing.
I agree. I hope he is too, man. That leads me to my next question, and I'm laughing, but it's really not funny. As I said in my opening, our country's in a very dangerous position if we, the people, can't get people in the government to stand up and fix this right away, because it does send a chill down my spine, and it should every American's. They also decided that Bruce Orr, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, whatever, was going to continue to meet with Steele as the cutout and the pastor of information, because they fired Steele, and continue to push the fake dossier, which was debunked really over and over again. The 17 errors the IG points out about the FISA application, they're really I don't know how he uses a straight face calling them errors. They're criminal activity, in my opinion. I mean, Lindsey Graham said it was a criminal enterprise. I agree with him, and I hope John Durham is doing what we said he is going to do, because these guys were just absolutely sinister. When you leave out the exculpatory information from a recording from a human source that's being recorded, and the guy or gal doesn't know they're being recorded, so they tell you what they're going to tell you, and it's exculpatory, and you intentionally leave that out, that is criminal, don't you think?
Not only that, why are we not hearing about quid pro quo with regards to this? That Bruce Orr, who was continuing to push this dossier, well, his wife was employed by Fusion GPS that made millions from the dossier. How much of that money went back into the Orr household? Why aren't we being given that information? To me, this looks like, in addition to everything else, a coup, an overthrow of the government. I believe what the president said is accurate. It looks like the Orrs made a lot of money on this while he was the number 4 man at DOJ. Why isn't anyone talking about that?
They're not talking about it because the IG didn't discover it, because a lot of these people are former, and I think most people in America that realize now that he doesn't have the scope to go get former employees and bring them in to testify.
Nellie Orr never was an employee. You can't talk to her.
Right, never was an employee, so that's not in the scope, but it certainly is in Durham's scope. One of the other little nuggets that I got out of the report is that it looks like Peter Strzok did lie to Congress when he said that he hadn't met with Orr, or couldn't remember it other than once, and I think he told Congress 3 different dates that he had recorded. So Mr. Strzok is called on the carpet again for lying, and I think the Durham investigation is going to. That's where I was going next. That's where I was going next.
Yeah. Go there.
I've written extensively and started writing in January of 2017 when the publication of the Russia intelligence community assessment was put out. Being in the intelligence community at a senior level and operating in that area on the military side, we operated with all of these different groups under all of the same policies and rules of engagement. And I was shocked when I saw that ICA come out on the Russia election meddling. And here's why I was shocked. Because the media was reporting that 17 agencies had unanimously said it. And when I read the report, it read exactly what I was expecting, is that, the FBI and the CIA had high confidence, but the NSA, which has the best information, because I know that, didn't have high confidence in the what was being reported in the report. And there was no unclassified, factual-based evidence to support the assessment of the overall ICA. And so I started writing about it and the politicization of the intelligence agencies. And you mentioned John Brennan, and that's where I was going next. John Brennan has got to be called on the carpet and held accountable legally, as does Comey, in my view. I don't know if we'll get either of those guys, but hopefully we'll get Brennan, because I think and have thought for a long time that Brennan was pulling a lot of strings in the CIA. And I was interested to see that Comey and Mr. McCabe both pushed to have the Steele dossier included as an appendix, at least some of the information, in the ICI. I had already figured that out, but the public generally doesn't know that. But now they do, and it's documented in this IG report. Do you think we can get Brennan?
Yeah, I do. I'll tell you why. Let's go first to the 17 intelligence agencies. It's always driven me nuts. I know it has you too. We've spoken off. Like they included Coast Guard intelligence into that looks at drug smugglers. I doubt the Coast Guard Coast Guard intelligence really weighed in on this, all right? It just sounded good because they fell under the DNI, and it sounded good to bring in 17 agencies, right? But on page 179 of the OIG report, they have Comey stating that Brennan was in a meeting where the dossier was discussed and that it was going to be included in an IC assessment. Brennan testified to Congress that he had no knowledge of it and it was never used. Well, one of them lied, and I think it was Brennan. And that's where Durham could get him for lying to Congress, charge him with it.
Yeah, I think it was Brennan too, and I believe that this was briefed to the President of the United States. The Crossfire Hurricane details were, and that he signed off on them. Probably not on paper or digitally, but I think that he signed off on it.
How could he not have? First of all, Barack Obama and Loretta Lynch were like this, like there you can see it, like that. They go way back, right? People forget that Loretta Lynch only had her career because Bill Clinton appointed her U.S. Attorney of the Eastern District in New York back in the 90s. All right. So he gave her, Bill Clinton handed her her career. She meets on the private jet with Bill Clinton. That in and of itself, she should have been fired. Should have been fired for doing that. Meeting with the husband of a suspect behind America's back. Should have been fired. But Obama loved it. And I believe that Obama was the one who set that meeting up to give Hillary cover. You can't do, I was talking to Bernie Kerik, former NYPD commissioner, on my show earlier. He made a good point. You can't start a tax case in the Southern District of New York without going to Maine DOJ and DC and briefing everybody. It is inconceivable that the FBI would be looking at the Republican presidential candidate, an international celebrity, billionaire with 100% name recognition, and the director of the FBI, the Attorney General, and the President of the United States wouldn't be in the loop and wouldn't have signed off. I think you're 100% right.
Yeah, and I think the Bill Priestep, which a lot of people don't know his name either, who is Peter Strzok's boss in the counterintelligence division of the FBI, he's getting the bus thrown in his face. He's been thrown in front of that bus, and he's plastered to it.
Yeah.
And apparently he alone made a decision not to give a defensive brief to the president-elect or the candidate, Trump, the nominee, or anybody on his team, which in my mind, okay, guys, but as a colonel that used to be a commander of major units in the United States military, one of them an intelligence unit, for me not to tell the president-elect or the nominee that we think he's got Russian spies in his campaign team, it just hits me as ludicrous.
Yeah,
there's no logic.
I don't believe it. No logic.
I don't either.
Why wouldn't you tell the guy? There's no rhyme nor reason to not tell the guy unless you were setting him up. None.
Exactly. And as far as the predication of the Crossfire Hurricane, according to policy in the DOJ, they made a big deal out of saying that it was Priestep that made the decision, that there's no political bias. But Peter Strzok was working for Priestep, and Page was advising them, and Page was the go-between between Andy McCabe and Strzok. And so you mean to tell me that this senior guy made the decision all on his own without any input from Peter Strzok or Lisa Page or Andy McCabe? That is bull feces.
Well, look, I think we both know what happened here, right? There was a click, right? Priestep wasn't invited to that little soiree in Andy's office, right? He was never on those emails. He was never brought into any of these things. So clearly there was a McCabe Strzok Page click. Now, Priestep's not an idiot. He knows that Strzok has the ear of the deputy director. So, of course, he's going to play ball because it doesn't really matter where they were in the pecking order. Strzok had the relationship with the number 2 guy. So Priestep did what he did, thinking he was on the team. And like you said, when it all hit the fan, they threw him under the bus because he wasn't part of their little cabal.
Exactly right. And probably never been a political guy in his life, and which is why it's hard to prove because they set him up, too, just like they set up Donald Trump, General Flynn, Manafort, who didn't help himself, obviously, but this was all a setup, and Roger Stone, too. I believe they've all been set up, Papadopoulos, and I think more than pardons should be happening for these men who have honorably served their country. And as far as Mr. Manafort goes, I don't know him that well. He was convicted in a court of law, but he would never have been there had it not been for this investigation and the targeting of Donald J. Trump and the desire to keep him out of power in the United States of America, man. It's just incredible what has occurred here. But the report, just to circle back to that, I believe it achieved its goal. Its objective was to detect whether there was abuse in the FISA application process for this warrant. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it showed there was, right? So Horowitz kind of, like we said, he split hairs a little bit. He split the baby. He didn't criminally refer, but I believe it's because he knows Durham will, right? So Horowitz can move on to a law firm. He did his job. He protected the institution. He called out the wrongdoing. But Horowitz knows that Durham is the real teeth of this thing. And I like, again, going back to the beginning of this, Barr and Durham are cautious guys, brilliant legal minds. They never would have come out with such publicly contradictory statements of the Horowitz report unless they had something. They wouldn't have done it. It'd be the end of their careers and reputations. They didn't spend 40 years building those reputations to end them over a soundbite.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. This is just the beginning of the end for the criminal enterprise that was started to take Donald Trump and his team and America down, really, and has really hurt our country over the last 3.5 years and continues to do so with these impeachment articles that are out there, John. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. How can people find you?
Oh, great to be with you, Rob. On Twitter, @John Cardillo, or my show's America Talks Live. And you can find, we're on all the major cable networks, but if you want to watch it streaming, it's newsmaxtv.com.
Thank you very much. And let's pray for our country. Encourage everybody to do that and stand up and call your folks that represent you in Washington and tell them it's time to take a stand and fix this government.
God bless, Colonel.
I'd like to thank John Cardillo for joining us today and wading through this swampy IG report that definitely made its point that the FISA system was abused by the FBI in Crossfire Hurricane, the counterintelligence investigation against the Trump campaign. Until next week, this is Rob Maness.